Now, our next witness is the second anonymous witness of the day and will be known as Mrs. A.G. So I make the order that the name and address of witness W0695, which is Mrs. A.G., to you and me, the name of her father who died, and the name of any other member of the witness's family, and any other identifying information, such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W0695 must be referred to only as Mrs. A.G. This order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered. And I may vary or revoke the order by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. Mrs. A.G.
Mrs. A.G., your full name is known to the inquiry. Please take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Mrs. A.G., you're here to speak about your late father.
Yes.
And your dad was a dock worker.
Yes.
Where did he work?
Cardiff Docks as a plumber.
And he was actually still working, age 65, when he was diagnosed with leukemia. What was he doing at that point, or he was about to do something?
Just finished. He was about to enjoy retirement and do 3 days a week with some friends working on central heating systems.
And you've described your dad as someone who was just incredibly fit. Incredibly fit,
that's the word.
Can you tell us how he came to be diagnosed with leukemia?
Well, he had a cold sore on his mouth and felt lethargic and went to the doctor, who took blood tests, and this is when they diagnosed leukemia.
That was in early 1972.
That's right.
And he initially received treatment at the Cardiff infirmary.
That's right.
And he was then transferred to the Heath Hospital.
It had just opened. It was newly refurbished.
Newly built. You know your dad was given a number of transfusions, but particularly one on the 17th of June 1971.
Yes.
Why does that transfusion particularly stick in your mind?
Because my father's condition deteriorated after that time.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. This was his grandson's first birthday, which was my son. And when we went in to visit my dad that evening, the nurses said that he had got out of bed, couldn't walk, and had crawled on his hands and knees to the telephone to ring to wish his grandson a happy birthday. Up until that time, he'd been walking.
And do you remember after that, when you went to visit him, something else had changed as well? You and your mum had to put on gowns.
Yes, that happened on one occasion. They told us they didn't want us to transfer any infections to him due to his leukemia, and we wore gowns and masks.
from the June, July, your dad's condition just continued to deteriorate.
Very much so.
And he died in September
Yes,
1972.
that's right.
After he died, a nursing sister spoke to you and your mum about a post-mortem. What did she say?
She spoke to my mum first and asked if my mum would agree to a post-mortem. And my mother said to me, I don't think so. She didn't like the thought of him being cut up after his death because she thought he'd gone through enough. And the nurse then asked to speak to me and said, please, could you ask your mum to agree to a post-mortem because it would be within her interest because your dad had suffered asbestosis and also hepatitis. So my mum reluctantly agreed.
Until that point, had you or your mum been told that your dad had asbestosis?
No,
Or hepatitis?
no,
And as far as you are aware, do you think your dad knew that he had hepatitis?
no.
Why are you so sure he didn't know?
We think he would have mentioned it. I honestly don't think he was told.
Were you ever told about what kind of hepatitis it was?
No.
It was just said to you that he had hepatitis.
And it was just the nurse, it wasn't a doctor.
Your mum wasn't sure about the post-mortem, but then
She reluctantly agreed, and a short while after, I can't remember how long afterwards, the same nurse came to see me and said, we're terribly sorry, we cannot carry out the post-mortem because the post-mortem room will be out of action for 3 days to be fumigated because of the hepatitis and the asbestosis. And would you please accept leukemia on his death certificate, although that is not what he died of?
And what happened then?
Well, we were horrified. We just didn't understand. They'd firstly asked if they could do the post-mortem and then said, no, we thought there must be more than one post-mortem room in the Heath Hospital. It's a new hospital. But my mother didn't want to cause any problems and said, yes, we'll agree to leukemia on the death certificate and leave things at that, which is what we did.
4 months after your dad's death, a letter arrived at your mum's home. Could we have document 0695002, please? And it says this, it was written to your dad, indicating that he was transfused on the 17th of June 1972. And it simply says, we're following up a certain number of recipients of blood transfusion to find out whether they suffered any ill effects after the transfusion. Would you be good enough to complete the enclosed form and return it to me in the stamped addressed envelope provided? And we can then see some handwriting underneath that. That's your writing that you put some notes on at a later date.
That's right.
What did you do after you received this letter?
Well, I must admit it upset my mother terribly, addressed to my dad. And she telephoned me. I went up to see her and we said, well, what was in this blood transfusion? Why are they writing this letter? And why haven't they checked their records with the Heath? And they would understand my dad had died 3 or 4 months before. So I wrote back to them, asking why this letter had been sent to my dad when he had died, why hadn't they checked their records, and what was in that blood transfusion.
Did you ever get a response?
I did not have a reply.
And when and subsequently you found this letter had been kept for all these years?
I found it after my mother's death, and it was, yes, she'd kept it.
But to this day, you still don't know what that letter was really asking about. You also found out that one of the nurses left shortly after your dad died.
Yes, we did.
Why does that raise concerns for you?
Well, we felt that the nurses knew more than they were able to say. We couldn't understand why they didn't put hepatitis and asbestosis on the death certificate without the post-mortem, because they knew he had it. They told us. The nurses knew. And I think some of the nurses got terribly upset at what was going on in the background there, and they just couldn't take it anymore. The one nurse did say, "Things are happening here. I can't stay here anymore."
But you've never been able to establish what
Never.
was happening
No.
or to have any answers to your questions?
No.
You lost your dad, your mum lost her husband. What, if anything, do you want to tell us about that, particularly in relation to your mum?
Well, my mum spent the next 20 years on her own, and it upset her terribly, the type of death her husband had had. We saw him deteriorate so rapidly, and she would go to bed at night with these horrible thoughts in her head, and she didn't sleep very well. It was just something that stayed in her mind until she died.
You've described in your statement that your father's death haunted
It
your
did
mother
haunt
for the
her.
rest of her
That's
life.
that. She did. It did haunt her.
And you've said that it was particularly the questions about what had happened that haunted her.
Things we didn't know. It was the why. Why didn't they put the details on the death certificate? Because they told us he had it, so they knew that. We just felt that there was a cover-up.
Your mum struggled financially after your dad's death. Can you tell us about that?
Well, she just had a widow's pension. She was then 60 herself. She did take a 3-day-week part-time job in a local shop, a newsagent's, to help with finances. I think she just found it very difficult because my dad was going to work 3 days a week, which would have brought an income into the home.
And she never applied for any financial assistance?
None whatsoever. We didn't know she could do that.
Those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I would just like to thank the inquiry for bringing this to the fore and hope that something good can come out of it and these cover-ups just won't keep happening.
Sir.
You've described events 47 years ago with admirable clarity. I have to say that I reckon that you were probably very nervous when you came to give evidence.
Yes.
I see you're nodding. Everyone must be, but you realise how important it is that evidence such as yours is given about a death and a transfusion so long ago, all of which is an important part of the picture. And I just want to let you know how much your evidence, short though it may have been, has been appreciated.
Thank you very much. It's never gone out of my head.
No, well, I can see that. And that's what makes it so useful to hear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, if you just want to stay there for a moment while I tell everyone what's happening, or I don't tell everyone what's happening tomorrow, Miss Fraser-Butlin will. But what is happening tomorrow?
We'll be hearing from Gaynor Lewis, Beverly Tumulty, Hugh Thomas and Anthony Lane.
And we start at 10. So 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please.